My name is Mario. I'm Brazilian, 35 years old, and until recently, I was just another nightclub bouncer in São Paulo. I've thrown drunks off the dance floor, broken up stupid bar fights, seen married women kissing another guy in the VIP section, and then paying me the next day to keep my mouth shut. I thought I'd seen it all. But then a guy named Dominic Leclerc showed up, a French billionaire, one of those tech geniuses who invented apps, platforms, and even a chip that measures your mood by the sweat on your skin. The guy was known for being eccentric and very dangerous. One day I got the strangest offer of my life, to work in a technological fortress in the middle of the sea. I still remember the interview. The guy who hired me said, in slightly broken English, "Mr. Mario, the job is simple, personal security, but it requires absolute secrecy. You can never tell anyone anything you witness." I joked, "Look, sir, I've seen a naked celebrity throwing up in a dressing room. I don't tell anyone anything." He gave me a serious look. "It's not that kind of secret." 2 days later, I was in a helicopter, flying over the ocean, and down below the so-called fortress appeared. Man, it looked like something out of a James Bond movie. It was an artificial island, full of glass walls, metal towers, giant solar panels. The sea crashed against the structure with huge waves, but everything there seemed solid. Dominic Leclerc built it himself. They say no one knows where the island begins or ends, and that part of it is submerged, full of secret rooms. When I got off the helicopter, I immediately felt the strange atmosphere. There were security guards in black suits in every corner giving me dirty looks. There was a camera every 10 square feet. Dominic appeared to greet me. Thin, tall, gray hair tied back in a ponytail, round glasses. He wore a white dress shirt, but with the top buttons undone. He looked relaxed, but he had a look in his eyes that gave me the chills. He greeted me and said in perfect English, "Welcome, Mario. This is where the future happens and where a lot of people can disappear if necessary." That made me want to get right back on the helicopter, but the pay was too good, so I swallowed hard and stayed. Dominic explained that a meeting called the Visionary Conclave was going to be held there, only for ultra-special guests. Billionaires, politicians, CEOs, huge influencers. The goal, according to him, was to discuss the future of the world. But right away, I realized it wasn't just that. The first night while I was on patrol, I heard two men talking on a terrace. Dominic is going crazy. He wants us to confess our dirty secrets in front of everyone. We have no choice, my friend. He already knows everything. If this leaks, my company goes bankrupt. That sent a chill down my spine. The next day, Dominic called me into a huge room. It looked like a movie theater, full of leather armchairs and giant screens. He told me to stand in a corner without saying a word, and that's when the guests began to arrive. First, a beautiful blonde woman entered, all dressed in white, an influencer with over 50 million followers. On Instagram, she's always smiling, preaching love and positivity. But there, in person, she looked like she was about to puke from nerves. Next, an Asian man entered, the owner of a social media company. They say he can manipulate elections just by pressing a few buttons. There was also a Brazilian politician, known for being Mr. Clean, but whom everyone suspects of laundering money offshore. Dominic stood before them and said with an icy smile, "Gentlemen, welcome to the Visionary's Fortress. Today we take off the masks." Everyone fell silent. Dominic continued, "No one here is clean. All of you have something to hide. And we all know that in the real world, secrets are the most expensive currency there is." He reached for a remote control, and the giant screens lit up, showing numbers, graphs, photos, famous faces. He said, "This island is my creation. Here I keep truths that no one wants the world to know. And today, I want to hear a confession from each of you." Chloe, the blonde influencer, whispered, "He's going to kill us if we don't talk." And I, in the corner, thought, there in the middle of the sea, I realized that the worst prison has no bars. It's made of secrets. After Dominic said he wanted to hear their confessions, the whole room went cold. It felt like the air conditioning had been cranked to the max. Chloe, the blonde influencer, was as white as a sheet. The Brazilian politician was sweating so much his forehead looked like it had been rained on. I, in the corner, pretended to be staring at nothing, but my ears were wide open. Dominic took a few slow steps across the stage. He looked like a teacher walking between rows of students just waiting for someone to turn themselves in. He said, "I know some of you think you can hide secrets, but I assure you, nothing stays hidden from me." One of the men, heavyset, in an expensive suit, raised his hand. "Dominic, this is going too far. We came here thinking this was just a business retreat. No one is going to confess to anything illegal here. Dominic smiled calmly. You already have, just by opening your mouth. Everyone stared at the heavy-set man. He blushed and lowered his head. Dominic continued, You are not at a retreat. You are in an arena. And the only one who will leave unscathed is the one who understands that these days, it's not the good who win, but the one who controls the narrative. As he spoke, the screens behind him began to display images, faces of politicians, CEOs, influencers, newspaper headlines, scandals, all flashing by quickly. And I thought, this guy isn't kidding. He's blackmailing the entire world. Suddenly, Dominic pointed at Chloe, the influencer. You, stand up. She remained motionless, like a statue. Dominic spoke more firmly. Chloe, everyone here knows your motivational videos, your perfect woman image, but I know that 2 years ago you funded bots to destroy another influencer's reputation, just to steal her advertising contracts. The woman covered her face with her hands. No, that's not true. Dominic snapped his fingers. One of the screens showed WhatsApp conversations, bank documents. Her name was there, on several transactions. The room erupted in a murmur. My God, said an Italian businessman. Is it all true? Chloe started to cry. She tried to say something, but her voice wouldn't come out. Dominic just smiled. What you call influence, I call manipulation. Chloe collapsed into her chair, trembling, and Dominic turned to the Brazilian politician. And you, Congressman, do you really want me to show the video of the black briefcase in your office? The man turned green. Dominic, please, my family. Dominic held up a finger. I don't care about your family. I care about truths. The tension was unbearable. I saw people fanning themselves as if they were about to faint. An Asian magnate, in an impeccable suit, stood up. Dominic, this will destroy the economy. Do you want to see the world burn? Dominic replied calmly. No, I want to shape the world. I want to be the sole source of truth. I started to sweat. There, I realized that no one was untouchable. And I also realized that I, a security guard, knew things that could get me killed. Dominic pointed at the Asian magnate. And you think no one knows that your company manipulates political trends in several countries? That you decide elections by creating targeted fake news? The man turned pale. Dominic, if this gets out, the stock market will crash. Dominic smiled. I know. That's why I'm here. The blonde woman, still crying, spoke weakly. Dominic, why are you doing this? He turned to her. Because I'm tired of lies. I want to build the world's greatest weapon, the weapon of truth. And I thought, the worst tyrant isn't the one who threatens you with guns. It's the one who threatens to reveal everything about you. Dominic then clapped his hands, and the doors slammed shut with a dry thud. Mechanical locks engaged. No one leaves here until the last confession is made. Chloe screamed, You're a madman. Dominic smiled. You can call me a madman, but I'm the madman who holds your secrets. The politician slumped in his chair, his head in his hands. The Asian man was breathing as if he were about to pass out. I could only think of one thing. There, in that place, everyone was a prisoner, including me. The doors of the room slammed shut with a bang so loud it sounded like a gunshot. Everyone jumped. Some people stood up, ready to run, but there was nowhere to run. I saw the Asian magnate clutch his chest as if he were having a heart attack. The Brazilian politician was huddled, muttering quiet prayers. Chloe, the blonde influencer, was crying with her head down. Dominic raised both hands, calling for silence. Gentlemen, no one needs to die here, but the truth needs to be born. The silence was so thick you could hear the sea crashing against the fortress's glass walls. I could even feel the floor vibrate with the waves. Dominic walked slowly to the center of the room. What you haven't understood yet is that truth is the greatest power there is, and I am building the ultimate tool to control it. The politician looked up, his voice trembling. Dominic, this will destroy the world. Do you want to be God? Dominic replied calmly. I don't want to be God. I want to be the editor of reality. I got goosebumps, because I saw in his eyes that he wasn't joking. The man truly believed what he was saying. Dominic pointed the remote at the screens, and images, spreadsheets, secret videos appeared. Conversations of ministers arranging contracts, CEOs laughing about environmental fraud, influencers rehearsing spontaneous posts paid for by companies. Chloe looked up, sobbing. Dominic, you're going to end everyone's life. He retorted, And how many lives have you all ended? People laid off, people humiliated, people deceived. You pretend to be saints, but you are the real villains. The Asian man tried to speak, his voice barely a whisper. Dominic, if this gets out, there will be war. Literally. Real wars. Dominic smiled, almost amused. And you think they don't exist now? The wars have changed, my friend. Today a hashtag can bring down a president. As he spoke, I, in my corner, started thinking I needed to get out of there. I didn't know if I would make it out of that event alive, but I also didn't know how to leave. The place was a labyrinth of corridors and automatic doors. Dominic then pointed the remote at Chloe again. You, for example, you feign love, but you live by destroying the reputations of those who threaten your brands. You bought hundreds of bots to invent affairs, addictions, scandals. She started shaking her head. Stop, please. Dominic continued. Do you want me to put the video of your manager transferring money to the fake news agency up here? Chloe broke down in tears. Enough, Dominic. I'll pay whatever you want. Dominic smiled coldly. I don't want money, Chloe. I want you to confess. The room was in a panic. People were shrinking in their chairs, like children brought to the principal's office. The Brazilian politician stood up and tried to assert himself. Dominic, this is kidnapping. You're committing a crime. Dominic just chuckled. And who's going to arrest me, Congressman? Interpol? The CIA? They're right here, in this room. Or did you think I didn't know? I felt a chill run down my spine, because at that moment I realized Dominic wasn't just bluffing. He really did know things about everyone. Dominic walked over to me for the first time. He stood so close I could smell his cologne, a scent that was sweet and metallic at the same time. Mario, you've seen a lot of dirt in your life, but I bet you've never seen the dirt of powerful people this up close. I tried to maintain my composure. Sir, I'm just here to work. He gave a crooked smile. Well, now you work for the most dangerous man in the world. Chloe screamed from the back of the room. You're crazy, Dominic. You want to blow up the planet? Dominic replied, calm as ever. I don't want to blow anything up. I want to rebuild everything. My way. At that moment, the screens began to show a blue code scrolling rapidly. It looked like programming. Numbers, words, graphs passing at a dizzying pace. Dominic announced, Gentlemen, I present to you my greatest creation, Atlas, the first artificial intelligence trained exclusively on the world's dirty secrets. The room seemed to suck all the air out. No one could say a thing. Dominic looked at each of them very slowly. With Atlas, I can crash stock markets, elect or overthrow presidents, create crises that only I know how to solve, or I can keep everything quiet. It depends on you. And I thought, there in the middle of the sea, I realized that sometimes the danger isn't what people hide. It's what they can do if they decide to tell. After Dominic dropped that bombshell about creating Atlas, the so-called artificial intelligence, the room seemed to stop breathing. No one blinked. Even I went cold. Because until then I thought he was just bluffing. But now I was starting to believe him. He looked at us with a kind of calm, but his eyes were like someone holding lit dynamite. And then he said, walking slowly through the room, You should be thanking me. Before me you lived in constant fear of being exposed. Now there's a chance to control it. Chloe, the blonde influencer, shrank in her chair. Her voice came out faint. You mean, you're the owner of the world now? Dominic turned to her with that half-ironic smile and said, I'm not the owner, I'm the editor. I felt my throat go dry, because the way he spoke, while it didn't sound like a movie villain, it sounded like a guy who truly believed what he was saying. He stopped near me and said softly, just for me to hear, Mario, people think power is money, but real power is knowing things no one else knows. I tried to step back a little, but he held my shoulder. And if you're the only one who knows, you control everything. The Asian woman, who hadn't said a word until then, raised her voice for the first time. She was trembling, but she looked Dominic in the eye. You're going to destroy the world, Dominic. You have no right to play with the lives of billions of people. Dominic looked at her and said calmly, I'm not playing, I'm saving. She retorted more firmly, Saving whom? Yourself? He gave a quick, almost imperceptible chuckle, and replied, Saving the world from you, from the lies you've all created. I realized that with every sentence the room got hotter, not in temperature but in tension. It felt like the air was heavy, as if there was invisible smoke inside. The Asian magnate stood up slowly, wiped the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief and asked, And if we refuse to cooperate? Dominic shrugged. as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Then I release everything. The man was speechless. Dominic added, an avalanche of truths. Headlines in every newspaper. Governments falling, companies going bankrupt, and you? You turned to dust. I swallowed hard, trying to stay still, but my hand was shaking, holding the radio. Carla said, her voice choked, Dominic, if you release everything, people will kill themselves. There will be war. Children will lose their homes, jobs, everything. He looked at her with an almost sad expression. I know, but that's the price of truth. The Brazilian politician stood up from his chair, pointed a finger at Dominic, and said in a nervous tone, You're a criminal. You think you're going to get away with this? You think you can blackmail everyone? Dominic turned his head slowly toward the congressman and said in a low tone that gave me chills, You know what the difference is between you and me. You need to lie to look clean. I don't. The politician stammered, trying to respond, but nothing came out. The man just collapsed into his chair, his face in his hands. Dominic turned to everyone and said very slowly, You are the most powerful men and women on the planet, but I am the man who holds your secrets. That makes me the most powerful. I started sweating so much my uniform was sticking to my body. I looked around, wondering if anyone would have the guts to go after him, but no one moved. Dominic looked at me and said, still speaking softly just to me, Mario, do you think I'm crazy? I hesitated and said, Sir, I don't know what to think. He smiled, a little sad. Then think about this. The world is already sick. I'm just breaking the fever. I thought, with my heart racing. In that place, I realized that the greatest fear wasn't dying. It was living with too much knowledge. When Dominic said that the world was sick and he was just breaking the fever, I just stood there not knowing whether to answer or just run. He was looking me right in the eye. He had a calm demeanor, but his gaze was like someone who could make you disappear in a second. I tried to change the subject and said I was just there to work, but he didn't even blink. He told me that now that I had heard everything, I was a part of it too. Meanwhile, the room was about to explode. A portly Italian businessman started shouting that this was kidnapping, that he was going to call his government, that Dominic would end up in prison. Dominic faced the man without even raising his voice and said that no one there was going to call any government because the government was sitting in that very room, quiet, without the courage to speak up. I looked around and saw the Brazilian politician hunched over, his hand shaking. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Chloe, the influencer, started crying again. She was saying quietly that she just wanted to go back home, that she couldn't take it anymore. Dominic walked over to her, slowly, as if to comfort her. He stopped right in front of her and, without raising his tone, let her know she should be grateful he was giving her the chance to confess before everything went public. He said that, the way things were, if she didn't talk, the brands would abandon her, the followers would call her a fake, and getting canceled would be the least of her problems because after that came the law. Chloe was in shock. She looked at him, trembling, and said she would pay whatever he wanted, that she would stay quiet. But Dominic wouldn't have it. He told her that no amount of money would change the truth. I started to notice that the atmosphere was so heavy that even the security guards were uncomfortable. I looked at my colleagues, saw that no one wanted to be there. It felt like we were all as trapped as the guests. It was then that Dominic turned to the whole room and said, This wasn't about blackmail. He said he was tired of living in a world governed by lies and that he was creating a new system where no one could hide anything. He said something I'll never forget. He said, Whoever controls the secret controls the fear, and whoever controls the fear rules the world. I felt my stomach churn when I heard that, because I realized he wasn't kidding. A Chinese magnate who hadn't said a word until then stood up. He spoke with a heavy accent, but you could understand him. He said Dominic was playing with fire, that this could bring down entire economies, governments, companies. Dominic turned his body slowly toward him and replied that was exactly what he wanted, that to clean up the world, sometimes you had to tear everything down first. The Chinese man shook his head as if he wanted to run out of there. He said he had a family, young children. He asked if Dominic would expose all of this, even knowing it would destroy the lives of innocent people. Dominic said that no one is truly innocent when they live off of lies. Chloe, sobbing, said she wanted to leave, that she would quit social media, give it all up. Dominic looked at her and said it was too late, that people could no longer run from what they had done. Meanwhile, in the back, I saw a group of men talking quietly among themselves. It looked like they were planning something. I moved closer slowly to try to listen, but the sound of the waves hitting the glass walls muffled everything. I only managed to catch a piece of a sentence. "We have to solve this before he releases everything." Dominic noticed the mood and raised his hands to get everyone's attention again. He said no one had to die there, but that everyone would have to decide if they wanted to live in the shadow of secrecy or in the light of truth. He said that if everyone cooperated, Atlas would only be used to maintain order, but if anyone tried to leave, everything would go out to the whole world. It was then that I realized we were at a dead end. Until then, I thought I could just keep my mouth shut, do my job, and go home with my salary. But at that moment, I knew that just by being there, I was also Dominic's hostage. I started thinking that if I were to say anything later, no one would believe me. They'd call me crazy, or worse, they'd make me disappear. And I thought, in that place there was no right or wrong. There was who had the truth, and who was afraid of it. After Dominic declared that everyone there was now a hostage, I felt my heart pound so hard it felt like it would jump out of my chest. I looked around and saw that no one was breathing properly. The businessmen had pale faces. Some were sweating. Chloe, the influencer, was trembling so much her makeup was running down her face. And all I could think was, "Mario, what the hell are you doing here? You should have just stayed in Brazil minding your own business." Dominic started walking around the room again, dragging his feet slowly, with that look of someone who is thinking. It seemed like he was savoring the fear in the air. He stopped in front of the Brazilian politician, the same one who was all hunched over, and asked if he wanted to confess something. The guy tried to speak, but his voice didn't come out. Dominic bent down, getting right in his face, almost nose to nose, and said he had 30 seconds to talk, or his videos would be on the internet in less than an hour. The politician started to cry. He cried like a child. He muttered things about his family, about his young children. Dominic just watched him cry with no expression on his face. He said he didn't need to be afraid of the truth. He said that in the end, the truth would set him free. But to me it was clear that this was no liberation. It was destruction. Chloe lifted her head, her voice choked, and asked what Dominic really wanted with all this. If he wanted money, power, or just fame. Dominic turned to her and said he wanted control, that there was nothing more powerful in the world than knowing people's secrets. He said Atlas wasn't just a tool, it was the key to controlling everything. Politicians, markets, public opinion. I confess that until that moment I was still hoping this was all a big bluff, but looking at Dominic's face I saw it wasn't. The man believed every word. He started to explain what Atlas could do. He said Atlas was capable of predicting human behavior, creating fake news that looked real, manipulating social media to change elections. He said he could, for example, invent a scandal about anyone there, and in 48 hours, half the world would believe it. Chloe looked at him with tears falling and said this was monstrous, that he was playing with the lives of billions of people. Dominic looked at her, took a deep breath, and said it wasn't him who was playing, that the ones who had always played with people's lives were them, the rich, the influential, the politicians. He said he was just leveling the playing field. At that point, a chill went up my spine, because in a way, I understood what he was saying, but at the same time, I knew it was wrong, because no one should have that much power alone. Suddenly, the Chinese magnate slammed his hand on the table and said he would pay whatever it took for Dominic to give up on this, that he would deposit whatever money he asked for in any tax haven. Dominic gave a slight chuckle and said that money meant nothing to him, that he already had more money than he could spend in 100 lifetimes. He said the real currency now was information, and that he had the world's largest collection of dirty information. The magnate was speechless. He just ran a hand over his face, looking sick. I looked to the side and saw two men talking quietly. One of them was saying that if Dominic released that data, there would be a global crisis that would bring down banks and destroy the economy. The other replied that if they didn't kill Dominic, no one would get out of there alive. I swear I felt my blood run cold when I heard the word, kill. Dominic noticed the murmur and clapped his hands to get attention. He said he understood that everyone was scared, but that this was the moment when each of them would have to choose. Either they confessed and joined his team, or they became his enemies. He said his enemies didn't last very long. Chloe shouted that he was crazy, that this wasn't justice, it was tyranny. Dominic looked at her, almost with pity, and said that the world needed tyrants sometimes, because without someone to control things, everything turned to chaos. I stood there just listening to that, thinking that until that night, I thought the biggest risk of my job was getting punched at the club. But now I was in the middle of a game that could bring down governments. And I thought, in that place I realized that the real danger wasn't dying. It was surviving and having to live with the knowledge of it all. After Dominic dropped that line about the world needing tyrants, the room fell quieter than ever. Not even the sound of the sea hitting the walls could cover up the weight in the air. I stood there holding my radio, but not daring to say anything. I was afraid to even breathe too loud and have him pick me to speak next. The Chinese magnate, who had only been sweating until now, decided to try again. He said, his voice trembling, that Dominic was playing with fire, that exposing these truths would cause global panic, an economic war, maybe even real wars. Dominic turned his head slowly toward him and let out that he was already at war, just that people hadn't realized it yet. He said that wars now were fought with hashtags, with viral videos, with likes. Chloe, the influencer, interrupted, saying that if he released everything, people would kill themselves, that fathers would lose their jobs, families would be torn apart, children would go hungry. Dominic looked at her with an air of someone who regrets it but doesn't feel it. And he said that, in his opinion, the lie was the thing that killed the most in the world, that leaving everything as it was would only postpone the chaos, not prevent it. I wanted to speak, but I swallowed my words, because I realized that nothing we said would change his mind. It was then that the Brazilian politician stood up slowly. His voice was choked, as if he was about to cry. He asked if there wasn't another way out. He asked if Dominic couldn't just delete everything, forget everything. Dominic took a deep breath, as if he were tired, and said that there was no going back, that the things he knew were already inside Atlas, and that deleting them would be impossible, because the AI was already running on secret servers scattered around the world. He said that even if they killed him right there, no one would be able to stop what was about to happen. I swear at that moment I felt my stomach tie itself in a knot. Carla asked why he had chosen those specific people to be there. Dominic replied that each person there represented a part of the system, that they were all important pieces in the game that manipulated the world. He said that if he could convince that group, he would have the world in his hands. A bald European businessman shot up in a rage. He shouted that this was terrorism, that he would find a way to stop Dominic. Dominic didn't even move. He just said in a low tone that if anyone there tried anything against him, all their dirt would be published in the same minute. He said, "I created an automatic trigger. If something happens to me, everything goes out to the world, and you all fall together." The entire room was in shock. Even the security guards exchanged glances. You could see that some of them were starting to realize they were just as trapped there as we were. I looked at Carla. She was crying again, her hands shaking. She whispered to me that she didn't want to be famous anymore, that she just wanted to go back to her simple life before the internet. I could only tell her that after that night, no one there would have a simple life again. Dominic walked to the center of the room. He said he had one more thing to show. He said he wanted everyone to understand the power of Atlas. He pressed a button on the remote. The screens lit up again. But this time, instead of documents or photos, they started showing simulations made by the AI. It was like watching the future being written. There were graphs showing stock markets crashing, governments being overthrown, giant protests erupting in several cities around the world. And in each of the simulations, a small screen appeared in the corner with the name Atlas and percentages of success. Dominic explained that those were scenarios that Atlas knew how to provoke. He said that all it took was releasing one piece of news, manipulating a few influencers, taking down or boosting hashtags, and the whole world could change in a matter of days. I could barely process what I was seeing. Chloe covered her mouth, horrified. She asked Dominic if he was willing to sacrifice real lives to maintain that power. Dominic replied that lives were already being sacrificed every day, that, in the world, every day someone died because of a lie, and that he just wanted to expose the truth, whatever the cost. I looked at him, trying to understand if he really believed this speech, or if he was just crazy. But deep down, I knew the answer. He did believe it. And that's when I thought, in that place, surrounded by sea and glass, I realized that the real danger isn't the one who shouts that he's going to kill you. It's the one who speaks calmly while destroying everything around him. After Dominic showed those simulations from Atlas, it felt like everyone had been punched in the gut. The room was so quiet I could hear the sound of the sea outside, as if the ocean wanted to come in and see what was happening. I stood there, my sweaty hand on my radio, wondering if it wouldn't be better to just jump into the sea and try to swim to God knows where. But I knew that if I tried to leave, I'd disappear before I even hit the water. Dominic kept walking around the room, looking at each of us as if we were products on a shelf. He said that everything we were seeing on the screens could happen tomorrow, or it could never happen, that it would all depend on the choices made right there in that room. The Brazilian politician, whose face was now red, stood up and shouted that he was going to report Dominic, that he was going to expose him to the whole world. Dominic turned his head slowly toward the congressman, stared at him with that cold gaze, and let out that he could expose him first, and that no one would believe a politician who had briefcases of money hidden overseas. The congressman sat back down in his chair, pale, unable to say another word. Chloe stood up slowly. Her voice was trembling, but she said that he couldn't decide the fate of the world on his own. She asked if he wasn't afraid of being killed by someone there. Dominic looked at her, sighed, and said that he did feel fear, but not as much as people feared their own secrets, and that if he had to die, he'd rather die as the man who exposed everyone's filth. I realized at that moment that some people started looking at each other, suspicious faces. Some were whispering. It seemed like they were trying to organize to do something against Dominic. Dominic noticed too. He held up the remote and said that he had a button that would release everything automatically if he died right there. He said he had servers scattered in several countries, even under the sea, and that all it would take was him not entering his password within a certain time frame for all the content to leak to the whole world. I swear I felt my legs go weak, because I realized we were in a no-win game. There was no way to stop the guy, but there was also no way to obey him without consequences. Chloe told Dominic that he was becoming exactly the kind of monster he claimed to be fighting, that he was trying to control people with fear, just like the ones he criticized so much. Dominic looked at her thoughtfully and said that maybe she was right, but that, in his mind, the difference was that he wasn't doing this to make money, but to free the world. He said that if someone had done what he was doing 30 years ago, maybe the world would be different today. No manufactured wars, no market manipulation, no poor people paying for the lies of the rich. I listened to that and was torn. Part of me thought he was completely insane, but another part understood what he was saying, and that scared me even more. While Dominic was talking, I saw two security guards exchange glances. One of them even took a step toward the stage, but Dominic didn't even have to do anything. He just held up the remote as if holding a gun, and the guard stopped in his tracks. Dominic said he wasn't going to release anything yet, that he wanted to hear the confessions first. He said that each one of them there needed to tell their worst secret, that it was the only way to prove they were willing to start over, without masks. A bald European magnate started talking. He confessed that he had embezzled billions in public contracts. He said he had funded extremist groups in several countries just to protect his investments. As he spoke, other people started to cry. Some tried to cover their ears. Chloe turned her back, saying she couldn't stand to hear so much filth. Dominic looked at her and said that covering her ears doesn't change the truth, that all of this had always been there, just that no one had the courage to say it. I stood there watching those confessions and thinking that my life as a bouncer in Sao Paulo was small potatoes compared to this place. Here, every word could be worth millions, or a death. Chloe asked if he was going to force everyone to live under his threat for the rest of their lives. Dominic said he didn't need to force anyone, that it was enough for people to know he existed. He said, "The simple fear of me already gives me more power than any government." And I thought, at that moment I realized that no one there was free. Everyone, including me, was a hostage to the fear that Dominic had created. After Dominic said that the world needed tyrants, the room fell quieter than ever. Not even the sound of the sea hitting the walls could disguise the weight in the air. I stood there holding my radio but not daring to say anything. I was afraid to even breathe too loud and have him pick me to be the next to speak. The Chinese magnate, who until then had only been sweating, decided to try again. He said, his voice trembling, that Dominic was playing with fire, that exposing those truths would cause global panic, an economic war, maybe even real wars. Dominic turned his face slowly to him and let out that it was already all-out war. It was just that people hadn't realized it yet. He said that wars now were fought with hashtags, with viral videos, with likes. Chloe, the influencer, interrupted, saying that if he released everything, people would kill themselves, that fathers would lose jobs, families would fall apart, children would go hungry. Dominic looked at her with an air of someone who laments but does not feel, and said that in his opinion, the lie was the thing that killed the most in the world, that leaving everything as it was would only postpone the chaos, not prevent it. I wanted to speak, but I swallowed the words, because I realized that nothing we could say would change his mind. It was then that the Brazilian politician stood up slowly. His voice was choked, as if he were about to cry. He asked if there was no other way out. He asked if Dominic couldn't just delete everything, forget everything. Dominic took a deep breath as if tired and said that there was no going back, that the things he knew were already inside Atlas, and that deleting them would be impossible because the AI was already running on secret servers scattered around the world. He said that even if they killed him right there, no one would be able to stop what was about to happen. I swear at that moment I felt my stomach clench into a knot. Carla asked why he had chosen those particular people to be there. Dominic replied that each person there represented a part of the system, that they were all important pieces of the game that manipulated the world. He said that if he could convince that group, he would have the world in his hands. A bald European entrepreneur stood up in a huff. He shouted that this was terrorism, that he would find a way to stop Dominic. Dominic didn't even move. He just said in a low tone that if anyone there tried anything against him, all of their dirt would be published in that same minute. He said, "I created an automatic trigger. If something happens to me, everything goes out to the world, and you all fall together." The entire room was in shock. Even the security guards exchanged glances. You could see that some of them were beginning to realize that they were as trapped there as we were. I looked at Carla. She was crying again, her hands shaking. She whispered to me that she no longer wanted to be famous, that she just wanted to go back to her simple life before the internet. I could only tell her that after that night, no one there would have a simple life again. Dominic walked to the center of the room. He said he had one more thing to show. He said he wanted everyone to understand the power of Atlas. He pressed a button on the remote control. The screens lit up again. But this time, instead of documents or photos, simulations made by the AI began to play. It was like watching the future being written. Graphs appeared showing stock markets crashing, governments being overthrown, giant protests exploding in several cities around the world. And in each of the simulations, a small screen appeared in the corner with the name Atlas and percentages of success. Dominic explained that these were scenarios that Atlas knew how to provoke. He said that it was enough to release a piece of news, manipulate a few influencers, bring down or boost hashtags, and the whole world could change in a matter of days. I could hardly process what I was seeing. Chloe covered her mouth, horrified. She asked Dominic if he was willing to sacrifice real lives to maintain that power. Dominic replied that lives were already being sacrificed every day, that, in the world, every day someone died because of a lie, and that he just wanted to expose the truth, whatever the cost. I looked at him trying to understand if he really believed this speech, or if he was just crazy. But deep down, I knew the answer. He did believe it. And it was then that I thought, in that place, surrounded by sea and glass, I realized that the real danger is not the one who shouts that he will kill you. It is the one who speaks calmly while destroying everything around him. After Dominic showed those simulations from Atlas, it felt like everyone had been punched in the gut. The room was so quiet that I could hear the sound of the sea outside, as if the ocean wanted to come in to see what was happening. I stood there, my hands sweaty on my radio, wondering if it wouldn't be better to jump into the sea and try to swim to who knows where. But I knew that if I tried to leave, I would disappear before I even reached the water. Dominic kept walking around the room, looking at each of us as if he were analyzing a product on a shelf. He said that everything we were seeing on the screens could happen tomorrow, or it might never happen, that it would all depend on the choices that were made there in that room. The Brazilian politician, who was already red-faced, stood up and shouted that he was going to report Dominic, that he would expose him to the whole world. Dominic turned his head slowly towards the congressman, stared at him with that cold gaze, and let out that he could expose him first, and that no one would believe a politician who had a briefcase of money hidden even abroad. The congressman sat back down in his chair, pale, unable to say anything else. Chloe, the influencer, stood up slowly. Her voice was trembling, but she said that he could not decide the fate of the world alone. She asked if he didn't feel afraid of ending up being killed by someone there. Dominic looked at her, sighed, and said that he did feel fear, but not as much as people feared their own secrets, and that if he had to die, he would rather die being the man who exposed everyone's filth. I realized that at that moment some people started looking at each other, suspicious faces. Some were whispering. It seemed that they were trying to organize to do something against Dominic. Dominic noticed too. He held up the remote control and said that he had a button that would release everything automatically if he died there. He said that he had servers scattered in several countries, even under the sea, and that it would only take him not entering his password within a certain time frame for all the content to leak to the whole world. I swear I felt my legs give way, because I realized that we were in a no-win game. There was no way to stop the guy, but there was also no way to obey him without consequences. Chloe told Dominic that he was becoming exactly the kind of monster he claimed to be fighting, that he was trying to control people with fear, just like those he so criticized. Dominic looked at her somewhat thoughtfully and said that maybe she was right, but that, in his head, the difference was that he wasn't doing this to make money, but to free the world. He said that if someone had done what he is doing 30 years ago, maybe the world would be different today. No invented wars, no market manipulation, no poor people paying for the lies of the rich. I listened to that and was torn. One part of me thought he was completely insane, but another part understood what he was saying, and that terrified me even more. While Dominic was speaking, I saw two security guards exchange glances. One of them even took a step towards the stage. But Dominic didn't even have to do anything. He just held up the remote control as if holding a weapon, and the guard stopped in his tracks. Dominic said he wouldn't release anything yet, that he wanted first to hear the confessions. He said that each one there needed to tell the worst secret they had, that it was the only way to prove that they were willing to start over, without masks. A bald European magnate began to speak. He confessed that he had embezzled billions in public contracts. He said that he had financed extremist groups in several countries just to protect his investments. As he spoke, other people began to cry. Some tried to cover their ears. Chloe turned her back, saying that she couldn't stand to hear so much filth. Dominic looked at her and said that covering her ears doesn't change the truth, that all of that had always been there. It was just that no one had the courage to speak up. I was there, seeing those confessions and thinking that nightclub life in Sao Paulo was small potatoes compared to that place. There, every word could be worth millions, or a death. Chloe asked if he was going to force everyone to live under his threat for the rest of their lives. Dominic said he didn't have to force anyone, that it was enough for people to know he existed. He said, "The simple fear of me already gives me more power than any government." And I thought, at that moment I realized that no one there was free. Everyone, including me, was a hostage to the fear that Dominic had created. I was there, standing, watching that bunch of rich people confessing crimes and dirty secrets, and I started to wonder if I wasn't dreaming. Because until a few days before, my biggest fear was someone running out on their bar tab. Now, I was in the middle of a game that could bring down governments. Meanwhile, Dominic walked slowly around the room. He seemed to be savoring every second. He told everyone that from now on no one would be able to hide behind marketing, beautiful speeches, or smiling family photos. That Atlas would bring everything into the light. He said that when Atlas was fully active, no one would be able to lie anymore. Chloe, the influencer, looked at him and asked if he had any idea what he was saying. She said that the internet was already a toxic place, that people already killed themselves over rumors, and that he would only multiply all of that by 1,000. Dominic shook his head slowly and said that the problem wasn't the internet, it was the people, that he was only exposing what already existed. He said that maybe it was cruel, but that he preferred to live in a world where everyone knew the truth, even if it was ugly. The Brazilian politician spoke up again. He was all sweaty, his tie crooked. He said that if Dominic released all that, the country would collapse. Millions would lose their jobs. Banks would fail. Dominic replied that there was no going back, that Atlas was already ready, and that now it was just a matter of deciding who would be on his side, or who would become a target. I realized that at that moment, even the most powerful businessmen were afraid. Some looked at the floor, others whispered among themselves trying to find a way out. But I could see in their faces that they already knew there was no way out. Suddenly, the Chinese magnate stood up and said that this couldn't continue. He said he was willing to pay billions to buy Dominic's silence. Dominic smiled to the side and said that money didn't matter anymore, that for the first time, money wasn't enough to solve a problem. He said that what mattered now was information, and that he had the largest collection of dirty information on the planet. Chloe started to cry again. She said she couldn't stand to hear any more confessions, that she was going to go crazy. Dominic looked at her and said she was only desperate because she knew her truth would also come out. At that moment, the room grew tense in a different way. I realized that several people began to look at Dominic with a certain hatred in their eyes. Some security guards also seemed restless. You could see they were torn between protecting Dominic or protecting themselves. A bald European businessman spoke softly, almost only for those nearby. "If we don't stop this man, none of us will get out of here alive." I heard that and felt the blood freeze in my veins, because until that moment I thought no one would have the courage to do anything against Dominic. But now I was beginning to realize that people were desperate enough to try anything. Dominic held up the remote control again and warned that if anyone approached him, he would trigger the release of everything automatically. He said he didn't even have to be alive to ensure that Atlas would do the job. Chloe asked, sobbing, if he was really going to put billions of lives at risk just to prove a point. Dominic said that it wasn't about proving a point, that it was about cleaning up the world. He said that sometimes, to cure a disease, you had to cut out the rotten part. He said, "You are the rotten part, I'm just cutting it out." I looked at Dominic and thought that if he pressed that button, life as we knew it would end. There would be no more untouchable giant companies, no more politicians hiding, no more privacy at all. And at the same time I realized that maybe that was exactly what he wanted. Suddenly the Chinese magnate took 2 steps towards the stage, but Dominic extended his arm slowly, pointed the remote control, and the man stopped. It seemed as if the remote was a weapon. No one wanted to risk finding out if it was real. Dominic said that if they wanted to try to kill him, they could try, but that Atlas didn't need him to work. He said that if he died, the system would release everything on the internet in less than an hour. I looked at Carla, who was just crying and repeating that she wanted to go home. I wanted to tell her that everything would be okay, but I didn't believe it myself. And I thought, in that place surrounded by sea and glass, I understood that the greatest power in the world wasn't money. It was knowing the secret that could destroy anyone. When Dominic said that even if he were dead, Atlas would release everything, the room fell into a silence so heavy it hurt the ears. I looked around and realized that the people there were no longer millionaires, politicians, or influencers. They were just a bunch of terrified people trembling, not knowing if they would wake up the next day with their lives destroyed. Dominic scanned the room, slowly, like someone observing the pieces on a chessboard before checkmate. He spoke in a low tone, but one that echoed through the entire room, that all of this was inevitable, that no one could live pretending the world was perfect anymore. He said he was going to free the world from lies, even if it was by force. It was then that Chloe, the influencer, stood up. Her legs seemed like jelly, but she took a deep breath and said that he didn't have that right, that no one had the right to play with the destiny of billions of people. Dominic looked at her with that cold gaze and said that the ones who destroyed the world were them, not him, that he was only revealing what they had done. Chloe said that he was becoming worse than the monsters he claimed to be fighting. I thought Dominic would shout, but he just took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment and said that maybe he was the monster, but that sometimes the world needed monsters to take down bigger monsters. The Chinese magnate approached again, in a last act of courage. He said that if Dominic released everything, there would be war, people dying, children without homes, total chaos. Dominic replied that maybe the world needed that chaos to start over the right way. Chloe shouted that there was no right way that started by destroying lives. Dominic faced her and said that the greatest violence was the lie. He said, "Lies build castles, but the day always comes when everything crumbles." While they were arguing, I noticed 2 men talking quietly, half hidden behind a column. One of them said that they would have to take Dominic out right there. The other retorted that if they did that, everything would leak. I stood there wondering if Dominic was really telling the truth, if he really had the power to bring down the whole world, or if it was just a giant bluff. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a bluff. The man was convinced. Dominic walked to the center of the room, held up the remote and said he was going to give one final chance. He said that if everyone there confessed their biggest secrets right now, he might consider keeping Atlas under wraps. But if anyone tried to silence him or flee, he would release everything. Carla was crying so hard she could barely speak. She said Dominic was sick, that he needed help. Dominic replied that he wasn't sick, that the world was sick, and he was just trying to save what could still be saved. At that moment, the Asian woman who had been silent the whole time stood up. She said it no longer mattered what Dominic wanted, that the world would find out sooner or later. She said that the greatest punishment for him would be to live alone, hated by everyone. Dominic looked at her with a look I'll never forget. It seemed like exhaustion mixed with sadness. He said, "I've been alone my whole life. It's not now that this is going to stop me." Carla grabbed my arm and whispered that she was going to faint. I held her, trying to stay calm, but I was almost collapsing myself. The Brazilian politician shouted that he would confess everything, as long as Dominic left his family out of it. Dominic said he couldn't promise anything, that the truth doesn't choose who it hits. That room became a sea of tears, shouts, half-finished confessions. Each person there seemed to be begging for a deal, but Dominic wouldn't budge. He said he would give them 5 more minutes for everyone to decide. He said, "If no one speaks, Atlas will speak for you." I looked at Dominic, and for the first time I noticed something in his eyes. It wasn't just power or madness, it was loneliness. Suddenly the lights in the room flickered. The giant screen went black. A metallic noise echoed through the hall, as if something huge had moved beneath the island. Everyone turned, startled. It was then that Dominic dropped the remote and said, "The decision is no longer mine. Now it belongs to Atlas." I felt my entire body go cold, because for the first time, Dominic seemed to be afraid. And I thought, in that place I realized that the greatest danger is not the man who holds the secret. It's the secret that learns to exist on its own.
All right, it's that time. If this story has you hooked, let's do the full ritual. Hit the like button to support the channel, subscribe so you don't miss a beat, and ring that bell to be the first to know what's coming. Your opinion is golden, so drop it in the comments below.